and economic growth. We've built this system. Many of you in this room, like Whit and some of the other folks, have been part of the success of this thing. So we need to make sure we continue that. We don't wind up doing things that are going to hamper innovation. One of the key things also that I think is important to understand when we're talking about the role is it resides within the National Security Staff, which is sort of a new term for some people, because the National Security Staff is a combination of what used to be the National Security Council staff and the Homeland Security Council within the Executive Office of the President. We brought these things together because it's necessary. But the representatives of the team that I work with, and some of them I'm very pleased to have here with me today, are representatives from NSA, Department of Defense, Department of Commerce, Department of Justice, the Office of Director of the National Intelligence, and Homeland Security. And we're building some more, looking for ways to make sure that we have a comprehensive view of what's going on. And I also want to make sure that everybody understands that over the past year, and I'm going to speak in a minute what that milestone is, these people have been hard at work. They've been working with many of you. They've been working internally amongst other government agencies. They've put literally thousands of hours of invested time into working to solve some of these problems. I'm going to talk about those in a few moments. Because these accomplishments that I'm going to be talking about are a direct result of the work that they've done over the past year. We also make sure that the President and his key advisors are thinking about cybersecurity in everything that they do. And that's very important because we know when you start looking at the areas of governance, risk, and compliance, one of the key issues of governance is you have to have the leadership from the top. Many of us have spent our careers sort of at the bottom, pushing up and saying this is important, we need to pay more attention to it. And market prices, stakeholders, earnings per share, all those things have been an impediment in the past. But we've recognized that cybersecurity enhances those things. They're no longer an impediment. So leadership from the top is important, and we see that, and you'll see through the rest of the week with some of the other government officials that will be here that we're really paying attention and we get it. But you know that President Obama, if you've seen his speeches, has made cybersecurity a policy within his administration. May 29th of last year was probably one of the most tremendous events that I've seen in our business. We had the President of the United States stand up and make a historic speech that says very specifically, cyber threat is one of the most serious economic and national security challenges we face. That America's economic prosperity in the 21st century will depend on cybersecurity. That was not a light statement. And anybody that's ever worked in government, when you're trying to form something like that, you have to make sure you're precise. So as a result of that, he also announced the release of the Cybersecurity Policy Review, which I'm going to talk about here in a few moments, because it's important to make sure that we are talking about the progress we've made on that and the efforts to go ahead and defend the information and the communications infrastructure. Now, what are some of the things that have taken place as we move forward on this? Well, one of the foundations aspects of the policy was to develop some transparency and accountability in cybersecurity. For that reason today, I want to quickly go through some of the updates on where we are on 10 of the items that we talked about, which were the near-term action items for the Cyber Policy Review. There's a lot of work to be done. We know it. The President said it. You know it. I know it. We all know this is not a silver bullet, but I want to make sure that you understand the progress we made over the past 9 months. The first one, and number one, pretty easy. The President said he's going to appoint somebody, and here I am. He wants to make sure that there's a senior policy person working these issues across government. Second thing, we need to update the strategy. There's a lot of strategies I mentioned done in the past, but to make sure that we're looking at it in today's terminology and to adjust as necessary. There's a lot of things that have remained the same. We still have vulnerabilities. We still have resiliences. We still have issues. We need to make sure it's updated. The third thing we look at is the idea of bringing sort of the private sector into this discussion and to making sure that the richness and robustness of our environments are still there. Now, out of these 10 things, it talks about the strategy. And when we start looking at number 3, the third item that when we were talking about the near-term policies, we want to make sure that we're looking at the privacy and the issue about the President's management agenda. There's been a lot of discussion about FISMA. I think a lot of us have said at one time or another, FISMA, you can be FISMA compliant but still not be secure. And we agree that there's work needs to be done with that. So next month, the Office of Management and Budget will be releasing and announcing the new fiscal year 2010 FSMA performance metrics, which will become a priority for each and every department. But after an extensive review with both private sector, industry stakeholders, government people, I'm pleased to say these new metrics begin to move us from a static compliance-based metrics program to a continuous monitoring capability that will help provide agency, department, and White House leadership with real-time situation awareness, inventories, configurations, incidents, and training for what we need to do across government systems. Item number 4 is designate a privacy and civil liberties professional within our organization, which is done. That person is now on board. Number 5, we need to make sure that we understand that we're leading an interagency government legal analysis of the work that we're doing. There's a lot of legal issues about what we do, and Scott only touched on a few of them this morning. I think there's 40-some-odd legal questions we've got to work through. The next item on the list that we're looking at is how do we create an international and national awareness and education campaign to promote cybersecurity. Many of us know about Cybersecurity Awareness Month in October. Last summer, the White House pulled together an interagency working group to look at this area. The working group then divided the work into 4 tracks. Track 1, National Awareness Campaign, led by DHS. Track 2, a formal cybersecurity education, led by Department of Education. The third is a federal workforce structure led by the Office of Personnel Management and Department of Defense. Number 4, the National Workforce Training led by Department of Homeland Security, Department of Defense, and Director of National Intelligence. These are actively meeting, come up with plans, they're meeting their goals, they have milestones, and we're making good progress in that area. The next item we have on there is when we start looking at the international cybersecurity policy. I know some of you are from the international audience here, and we need to make sure that our policy and framework is addressing the international threats. That we're making sure that we're establishing the norms internationally to make sure that we have clear understandings that we're not impacting private industry while governments argue about things. The next item we have on the list that I want to just really quickly touch on is, is the Cybersecurity Incident Response Plan. There should never be a question where a private sector needs to go during an incident. There should never be a question about how do we coordinate, how do we wind up making sure that the resources of private sector and government are being tethered together to make sure we're doing things right. I know Secretary Napolitano is going to talk more about this tomorrow, so I'm not going to get into a lot of detail on this because DHS and those folks are doing a great job pulling us together. The next item on the list is the issue of how we wind up. Let me get the scroll thing. Come on, folks. We're running out of time here. There we go. Develop a framework for research and development. We know all too well that there's a lot of research and development needs to be done, both near-term and long-term. NIST has been working with this. The Office of Science and Technology Policy has been working on this issue. We're looking at a couple specific projects that came out of this cyber leap year project, which is one, how do we deal with a moving target defense? Because no 2 attacks ever seem to be the same. And also, how do we do tailored trust bases? As was talked about this morning, how do we do only what we need to do, but still have the ability to do more things when necessary? The other thing we have to look at from the R&D perspective is the economic piece of it. I think it's vitally important we not lose sight of that. Then lastly, and something near and dear to many of our hearts, is the issue about a cybersecurity-based identity management strategy. We've got a lot of people coming together. We need to make sure that as we work on this strategy, that we pull these pieces together. We're looking at it from a secure online transaction capability. A couple things we need to make sure. One, first and foremost, to make sure it's interoperable. We need to make sure that one size does not fit all, depending on the device you're working with. So I want to then switch now to what I think is probably one of the most important pieces we've got about this. And as I mentioned in my earlier comments about the transparency and the ability to look at security. So many of you are aware that there was a comprehensive national cybersecurity initiative that took place a couple of years ago. But I'd like to start with my closure by talking about a quote from President Obama. In a memo to all departments and agencies, he said, "My administration is committed to creating an unprecedented level of openness in government." As I said earlier, that's something we're doing as well. In the cybersecurity aspect of it, we need to do as well.